at that time, I'm 15 years old, and by that time, I'd lived quite a bit of life. I grew up in Southern California, and my parents went through a really nasty divorce. I got through a custody battle. I wound up getting bounced from house to house to house. Ultimately, my mom wound up with full custody. She allowed me to go live with my dad and stepmom in Northern California, in the wine country, a place called Sonoma. My dad and I were always very close, probably closer than my mom and I. My dad's very outdoorsy. He was a pilot. He flew fighters in Vietnam. He was just kind of always my idol. And I lived with him and my brand new stepmom, who had never had kids, was very young, 29 years old. I lived with them for about a year. And, I was 13 and I wasn't really into punk rock yet, but I was just getting into skateboarding and I was 13. And so I was not an easy kid. Really, she would ask me to do chores, and like any kid, I would do them for 5 minutes and, slack off or whatever. And she had never had kids. So after about a year, she just got fed up. And their answer to having kind of this difficult time with me, and honestly, looking back, it really could not have been that difficult in the grand scope of all the teenagers I've known in my life. I was actually a really easy teenager, but they had had enough. And so they sat me down and said, look, you can't live here anymore. Your mom has full custody. So they had me call my mom because my dad and mom won't talk. And so Mom said, I live in this tiny condo. I don't have room for you. Why don't you fly to Texas and live with your uncle? So that was their solution. So I literally the next day, my dad put me on a plane. I flew to Dallas. I'd only been there once or twice. And I began living with my aunt and uncle and their two daughters. After about a year, they were very extremely religious, church 5 times a week. The daughters had never obviously lived with a boy, like suddenly being given a 13-year-old teenage brother. That's hard. And so after about a year, they were like, you know what, this arrangement's not really working. So maybe we could find somewhere else for Banning to live. And I had a lot of relatives in Dallas. So I moved in with another aunt and uncle who did not have kids living with them. And my mom wound up leaving California and flying to Dallas. And we lived in the room above my aunt and uncle's garage, my mom and I. And I grew up really affluent. And suddenly here I am sharing basically a flat with no walls with my mom as a 13-year-old boy. But it felt like maybe a place I could grow some roots. Like I wasn't being bounced around. Like the custody battle seemed to have come to an end. I'd fallen even more deeply in love with skateboarding. I discovered punk rock. I'll never forget that day. I was like sitting in an alley in wintertime and a kid introduced me to Minor Threat. And my whole life changed. Like just the first chords of that song rang out in the earphones of that kid's Walkman, and my life forever changed. So yeah, I had a girlfriend, I had friends, and I think it wasn't the life I wanted, but it was a life, and it wasn't terrible. My girlfriend was really sweet and pretty, and my friends were good people, and my mom and I ultimately wound up, she got a townhouse and we lived together. I'd rather be back in California. I miss my dad, but he doesn't seem to want me. So I guess I'll just make do with this. And it was like getting it, it was like sitting down at a restaurant, ordering something and being brought something else. And you're like, you know what? Okay, I'll just go ahead and eat this. It's not what I wanted. And that's kind of where I was. It wasn't the life I wanted, but it was a life. My life is so complicated and convoluted that it's sometimes difficult for me to introduce some important facts in the story. But, when I was 13, my parents abandoned me at an airport, and my mom legally was obligated to pick me up. And so by that time, a year after that, it's like, okay, mom's taking me back in, I've got friends, I've got a girlfriend, I'm skateboarding, I'm making like C's in school. I will say that probably the biggest single thing I was struggling with was the belief that I was lovable or likable. My parents had sort of damaged that belief in me because they didn't seem to want me. And when your parents don't want you as a kid, it creates this massive sense of doubt. Like, is something wrong with me? Am I not likable? Like, will other people not like me because my parents don't like me? And it creates a lot of complications too socially, because it's like, how am I going to, I can't hang out with my friends at my house because my house consists of a bedroom above my aunt and uncle's garage. So you begin to develop sort of, there's a couple ways around it. You can develop a facade, you can lie about it, you can keep people at a distance, and you can kind of create this facade around your life, sort of like window dressing. And that's kind of what I did, is I just sort of kept people at a distance emotionally. And my parents having left me at the airport really played a big role in that, because after that event, I kind of began to believe that I wasn't really a very likable person. And so that forever casts this sort of doubt over anybody who likes me. Anybody, I had, the prettiest girl in school liked me, and I was like, is this like a joke? Like, am I being set up to like be laughed at? Because it's middle school, it's a hard time. And my belief in myself had eroded, and because of that, I began searching for other ways to find it. And punk rock played a big role in that. Being a good skateboarder played a big role in that. But I was, for lack of a better term, wounded. And even though I was like, this is a life and I'm willing to live it, I was developing, for lack of a better term, kind of an infection, because I looked superficially okay, but underneath the surface, I was really hurt. And nobody had really addressed that. And I wasn't savvy, I'm 13, 14, 15. I'm not emotionally savvy enough to communicate what I need to get my needs met in that way. So I think in some sense, I really did need help. Like, I really did need somebody to reach out and give me a hand. Was it psychiatric? Or I don't think so. I don't think certainly didn't need what I got, but I needed stability. I needed friendships. I needed love. And I wasn't really getting a whole lot of that, especially from my family. And so I think there were people in my life who did have a genuine concern about my happiness and my well-being, which I think in many ways makes the hospital even more egregious, like even more terrible, because there were people there, maybe even including myself, who needed help. And what we got was absolutely not help. I had, like I said, a handful of friends. I was really into skating. My best friend at the time broke his board, like the deck of his board. And of course, most skaters at the time, you have 2 or 3 boards lying around with some loose trucks in your closet and wheels and bearings. And like at any given time, you could probably build like 3 or 4 kind of raggedy boards. And so he broke this deck he had. And so, there had been this deck on sale down at this shop. It was a bike shop that actually sold skateboards. And so I had just been lusting after this thing, and I used his breaking his board as an excuse to buy this deck for myself, and I'll give him my old one. I wanted to make it look like altruism, but there was a little thread of selfishness there, because I was so excited to get this Powell Peralta Mini Caballero. We go down to the bike shop, I buy the deck, I rebuild my board, I move my trucks and wheels to his board, and we go skating for the night. No big deal. I remember that night so vividly. I remember skating home at dusk. It's winter time. It was cold. It was kind of a gray night. And I remember the green fluorescent lights. And, we're skating at the junior high that I was going to, and it's probably 7 o'clock, 8 o'clock. And we say goodbye and I skate home. The next day I go to school, and my girlfriend and everybody else is like, hey, you gave away your board. And they had heard through the grapevine, high school, like playing telephone, that I'd given away my board. And I was like, well, I gave away it was my favorite board until I had my new one. And I was like, yeah, but I got this new one. And so by the end of the day, I'd been asked by so many people that it was like, something's up. Like, what's going, like, this just seems abnormal. And so I was growing kind of concerned. So I was skating home from school, and yeah, my school counselor pulls up in this little red 2-door car. I'll never forget it. And she pulls up to the light and leans over and rolls down the passenger window. And I'm standing there at the intersection. I'm like, who is this lady? And I vaguely like recognized her, but I'd never really spoken to her. And she said, "Hey, Banning, I need to talk to you about your skateboard." And I was like, by that time I was fed up. I'm like, so many people have asked me about this today. I almost began telling her. I remember the instinct to re-explain it for the 100th time. And I was like, you know what? Fuck it. I'm leaving. So I was like, I got to get home. So I just left. I was like, I just skated home. And I got home and my mom's car was home from work. My mom's a workaholic. I knew the minute I was probably 100 yards from our front door and her car is parked right in front of it. I'm at the very top of our apartment complex or townhouse complex. And I saw her car in the distance and I was like, shit, like something's up. So I tried to get, I tried to get in the house without being heard. And my mom comes running up to me and she's like, "Hey, the school counselor called me and told me." And I was like, "What?" And she said, "Well, you gave your skateboard away. It's this thing you love the most." And I don't know. I still to this day don't know what the school counselor had told her other than the few tidbits that I've learned here and there. But she clearly had called my mom frantic, had sort of blown this whole thing out of proportion. So my mom wasn't even getting the proper information. It had been reassessed by this guidance counselor, school counselor. So my mom's like, "Look, we need to go see Sam." I call him Sam in my book. He's this therapist that my mom had forced me to go see. I didn't mind seeing him. He was actually kind of a cool dude. He didn't, my mom hated my friends, hated my girlfriend, said I looked like shit all the time. She didn't like skating. She didn't like my music. She didn't like anything about me. But Sam would listen to me, and I was like, I mean, I don't care if he's getting paid. Like he treated me with some level of respect and dignity, which I was not getting from my family. And so I was like, we're gonna go see Sam. Like it's like 7 or 8 o'clock or something. So we drive there, we show up. We talked. Sam's like, "Are you depressed? What's going on?" He's worried. And so he said, "Look, I want to see you again tomorrow." So I'm like, whatever. I know by this time I'm just like a peon. Like I'm going to get dragged around and told what to do regardless. Like nobody's going to listen to me. So we show up at his office the next day after school and my dad is there. And the minute I see my dad in the same office with my mom, they won't look at each other, but I knew then that something horrible had happened. I'm like, what is about to happen to me? So Sam, me, and my dad and my mom all sit down and they explain, look, Sam takes out a bunch of photocopies of things. He's like, "Look, here's some drawings you did, and here's a photocopy of the cover of your book. It says tendencies." And I was like, "Dude, Sam, it's a band. Like we've talked about this band. Don't you listen to me?" And I'm laughing. Like I'm almost laughing because I'm like, this all just seems so foolish. And because it's a bunch of adults who are totally out of touch with reality. Like if they just understood punk rock and skating, like there'd be no problems here. But it's just like 3 square parents who don't understand anything. So they make the decision with really no input from me that they're going to put me in a hospital that night, a psychiatric hospital. In Sam's words, it's for 2 weeks. It's just for an assessment. And my mom's like packed my stuff. Like she had packed a bag for me and put it in the trunk of the car. I didn't know any of this until we're leaving the office. So they drive me to the hospital that night. And from the outside, and there's so much I could share about like my book and my past and stuff. But for me, trauma creates really vivid memories. They've become really deeply etched in my mind, and I replay them a lot and I ruminate on them. And because of that, the details get sort of accentuated and stuff. And so like the night that I got signed into the hospital is very vivid to me. I can like go back and literally roll the tape and watch that happen. It looked like a prison. It was at that time a single-story building with like these heavy screens on the windows and lit with fluorescent lights, and there was a fence around it, and it looked like a prison. And they take me inside, and they, I don't need to go into all the details, but they signed me into an adult assessment unit that night. And I was there for 2 weeks, and then I was like, "Hey, my time's up." And everybody there was an adult. Like there was one teenager there for about 24 hours, and then he got discharged. And so it was just me with a bunch of adults. And they would all talk about AA and NA, and I didn't know what the fuck those were. I'd never even heard those terms in my life. And their serenity prayer and stuff. And they're all talking about addiction and stuff. And they look at me and they're like, "What's wrong with you?" I'm like, "My parents got divorced and now I'm in a psychiatric hospital. That's what's wrong." Like, and so I was seeing a doctor who was assigned to me. We would talk like 5 minutes a day. He never listened to me. He would just like, he treated me like a stupid teenager, which so many adults, I get so angry for teenagers. Like I still relate to teenagers. When I talk to them, I'm like, the world is against you guys. They will always be against you guys. And I'm not one of them. Like I'm on your side. Like so many adults treat teenagers like they're stupid or it's just a phase. And let me tell you, guess what? The 20s are a phase, the 30s are a phase, the 40s are a phase, the 50s are a phase. The teens being a phase is no different than any other fucking phase of your life. So if you're a teenager and you're listening to this, yes, adults are clueless. They do not understand you. And so I just was frustrated and angry and scared. And they kept me there a month. And then my doctor sent me down and he said, "Look, he said, we think you suffer from severe clinical depression." He said, "You're not able to make friendships here." And I was so mad when he said that, because I'm like, you've given me a bunch of mid-20s chain smokers talking about NA and AA, and you want me to make friends? And we're not allowed to touch each other or hug. We're not allowed to have any personal conversations, really. Like how am I supposed to build friendships? Like it seemed so contrived and cruel. And it would just really upset me. And so he said, "Look, we're going to send you to the adolescent long-term unit." And I've been in this hospital for a month. I've not gone outside. Haven't had a hug. Haven't had a visit from any friends. All I see is my mom like once a week. I'm like cut off from reality. I cannot use a phone. And so I had heard horror stories about the adolescent long-term unit. You know, there were rumors that kids had been there for 2 and 3 years, that some of them had been tied to beds and wheelchairs. I didn't even know how to imagine that. Like when they said that kids have been tied to wheelchairs or beds, I'm like, what? Like with rope? Like with like, who would do that? Like handcuffs? Like what's going on? And so a couple, like probably 3 or 4 or 5 days pass, and then they transferred me. And the night of that transfer again is something else that really lives vividly in my memory. And things really shifted. Like the hospital, it's almost like 2 different hospitals. Like when I think of that first month there, it was like a very different experience than everything after it. Everything after that first month is dramatically different. It's like a whole different plane of existence. Like maybe my mom and I's relationship was fracturing at this time. And if anything, that first month in the hospital kind of made us closer in a weird way, because she was scared because she didn't know me, because she had never taken time to know me. She was being told I was, and I was scared because of where I had been sent and how terrifying it was. And so our meetings, it felt like 2 of us sitting in a lifeboat at sea. Like we were very sort of like, what do we do? What do we do? And I just kept telling her, I want to leave. Like, I don't want to be here. I can't go outside. I can't see my friends. I can't use the phone. And she kept saying, I just want to make sure you're okay. And so it was clear that she was going to just put her faith in the psychiatric system. And it was clear that I wanted to leave and that she was not going to take me out. And I was a minor. I could not sign myself out of the hospital. And so it was like this unstoppable force meets an immovable object. And so we were really kind of huddled in this lifeboat together, just scared for each other or scared for ourselves. And so if anything, I think it made my mom and I put aside a lot of the other things that had been troubling our relationship. And it gave us a singular purpose, because now we had, like, for lack of a better term, a common enemy. And in her mind, it was my tendencies, which was a band. And in my mind, it was where I was living, and that my only way out was her saying, please, sign my son out. So when I got sent to the adolescent long-term unit and everything changed, I think there were, and some of this I did not know until long after I left the hospital. But after every visit, the doctors would debrief the parents and tell them, the parents would be like, hey, I'm thinking about signing my son out. The doctors would sit the parent down and be like, look, if you sign your kid out, it's AMA, it's against medical advice. And if they commit suicide or something, we're not going to be liable. Like, they would say things like that. And nowadays, being a parent, like, Jesus, like, how terrified my mom might have been during those meetings. Like, I understand what parental love feels like now. And to try to put myself in her mind and implicitly trust these professionals with your kid's life, potentially, that I don't know. I felt, and sometimes still feel, some empathy for my mom because of the sort of Damocles she had hanging over her head. And so when I got sent to the adolescent long-term unit, life was very different. So they walked me, the night of my transfer, they walked me across what we called the rotunda. For lack of a better explanation, the wings of the hospital, structurally the hospital looked like a star, like a 5-pointed asterisk, and each wing was like a spoke. And in between them, the hub of where they all met was the rotunda. It was like this hexagonal shaped room where all the doors for each unit met. And each wall was an opening, a doorway, a magnetically locked double-doored structure to the next unit. So they walked me across the rotunda to the adolescent long-term unit, which was called Unit C. And I looked through the windows. There were these narrow security windows with wire in the glass. And there was two doors. So I'm looking through one window, and then about 6 feet away, there's another window, because it's mirror image doors. And I'm looking through both windows, and instead of seeing tons of adults and cigarette smoke and people playing cards and activity, I saw nothing. I saw just an empty hallway. It looked like they were walking me onto an abandoned unit. And so that scared me. I immediately was like, this looks creepy. So a staff member walks toward us. He unlocks the doors. He walks me onto the unit. And immediately we walk about 10 feet. And on my left is what they called the day room. And it looked almost identical, although it was opposite mirror image of my other unit. The day room was on the right in my old unit, on Unit B, and this was on the left. And I walk in and I look to the left, and there's the day room. No cigarette smoke, no board games, no people playing cards. It was silent. And there was what they called a unit meeting going on, where about 14 people or so were sitting in a rough circle talking. One person, a girl, was crying, and she had her hair hanging down over her face. And there was this really beautiful older woman talking with her, listening to her. And that woman was clearly a doctor of some sort. And I'm looking in this room, and half the room or more turns to look at me, because and I didn't learn this till later, but a new kid coming on the unit was a big deal. Like, everybody's curious about the new teenager. Like, are they cute? Are they rough around the edges? Are they going to be violent? What kind of person is about to live with us for the next, year or two? And so as I'm walking and I'm looking at this whole scene, which takes like 5 seconds or less, 10 seconds or less, I look in the back right hand corner of the room, and there's a girl tied to a bed, and it's with leather straps, what they call posy cuffs. She's strapped to a wooden bed, and it just, all the bed has on it is a white fitted sheet, a white pillow, and this girl. She does not have covers over her, and she's strapped down, spread eagle, like tight. This is not like I can move my limbs. This is like you're strapped down for an MRI. Like you absolutely cannot move an inch. And shows her body, like the tension of her body being pulled into the mattress by the restraints. You can like see it. And she looks up at me like she's being forced to lay totally flat. So she tips her neck way up. She like bends her neck and watches me. And her hair is like super matted. It's like, it's not dreadlocks. It's just like, she looks like a cave girl. And her fingernails are real long. And I just remember seeing her, and she had this look in her eye, like, I don't know, I can't even describe it. It's just like, it was just like empty and scared and sort of lifeless. And she just sort of watched me walk past. And I remember immediately becoming like very scared. So they walked me to my room, and it turns out like my roommate's in restraints. He's in wheelchair restraints. So he comes rolling in a wheelchair, strapped to a wheelchair with a strap on each arm and each leg. His ankles are strapped to where the little pedals are for your feet, and his hands are strapped to the armrest of the wheelchair, but they give you enough slack that you can kind of move yourself. And it's kind of, when you get used to it and you're there for a long time, it's sort of comedic looking. It's sort of funny watching somebody sort of kick themselves around and try to move themselves around with these like little awkward puppet motions. And he rolls in and he's like, "Hey, I'm Michael." And it's like, he was this super fun animated kid. And I'm like, it's almost like he hadn't even noticed he'd been tied to a wheelchair. Like he didn't even seem to mind. It was like the most normal thing in the world to him. And so they start getting him ready for bed because this is evening, and they slowly transfer him. One limb, they take a limb off, unstrap an arm from the wheelchair. They have him lean way over, and they strap it to the bed. And then they do the same thing for his left arm, same thing for his right leg, same thing for his left leg. Like he's a wild animal that like might attack somebody. And he's like, the whole time he's just like chatting with me, like, "Hey, what was your old unit?" I'm like, what the hell? Like, what? This kid is clearly not violent or dangerous. Like he's really nice and animated and gregarious. And it was just very weird. And there were probably 4 or 5 people on the unit that were in restraints at that time. Some, whether it was bed restraints or wheelchair restraints. That girl that was in the corner of the room, I call her Sonia in the book. She ultimately spent well over 2 years in restraints, and in one single, in one single span, uninterrupted, she spent 18 months in restraints. That's tied supine to a bed for 18 months. You know, you're going to the bathroom in a bedpan. You sleep in the hallway because you're on suicide watch. So you sleep under fluorescent lighting that's never turned off. You never go outside. Obviously she has a period once a month. So she has to manage that with the help of staff. She has no privacy, no dignity, nothing. Yeah, you haven't washed her hair for 18 months. And every day she became like family. Like all of us on the unit became something like a family. We were not allowed to touch. We weren't allowed to come within 6 feet of one another. We weren't allowed to have private conversations. My roommate, Michael, taught me sign language. So we could talk at night after lights out. It's like another world. Kids would tap on walls in code to talk to somebody in another room. Staff would come around every 15 minutes and do a head check all night long. It was, we obviously didn't have a phone, no TV, no phone, no music really. I mean, there were rare occasions where we were allowed to listen to music. And I was put on what's called chair restriction. So I kept forgetting to close my door. They had a rule in the hospital, you have to close your door. And I kept forgetting because I was 15. And every time I forgot to close my door, they would give me what they called a 30-minute chair. And they would have me sit in the hallway facing outward, just back to the wall, feet flat on the floor, hands on my lap. For 30 minutes, think about why you can't close your door. And why do I need 30 minutes to think about that? And so if you do anything while you're on chair that would cause you to get another chair, then since they can't give you a chair because you're on one, they give you what's called a test mark. It's like a demerit. And I got so many test marks while I was on my chair from like making eye contact with other people who were on chair, or laughing, or squirming, or not sitting with my feet flat on the floor. I got so many test marks that there was not enough time in the day for me to sit enough 30-minute chairs. So they finally put me, after I'd only been on the unit like 2 or 3 weeks, they put me on what they called indefinite chair, which means all my activities and free time, which we barely had any of anyway. It was maybe an hour or 2 hours a day of activities, like what they called AT, RT, OT, which was art therapy, recreational therapy, and occupational therapy. They took those away and turned them into chair time. And then, like, I think maybe at that point in time, we were getting half an hour of free time a day where we could read a book. But that was taken away for everybody very quickly. So I sat an additional hour and a half to 2 hours a chair a day. That lasted about another 2 weeks or a week. And then they finally said, look, you're getting so many test marks that we're going to create a new type of chair for you. It's called permanent chair in room without meals. So I lost everything. I lost every privilege I could have. And I was not even allowed to eat in the supervised communal cafeteria area, which was just a room. I was not allowed to sit in there with everybody else and eat a meal. I had to eat off a tray with the food in my lap. And I had to sit chair in my room, facing the wall of my room. When I was in school, which was 3 days a week, I usually sat chair probably maybe 7 hours a day, which really, I mean, it sounds unbelievable to most people, but 7 hours was actually not bad. It was not a bad day. It was summertime and days when I didn't have school or weekends. That was the worst. I was like the only teenager in the universe who liked school because it kept me off chair. When I wasn't in school, I would sit chair 10, 12 hours a day, like no problem. I'll talk briefly about this. It's not something I like talking about, but I think it's important to talk about, is a lot of people who are in restraints, and primarily Sonia, who I talk about in the book, The Girl in Restraints. She was really, she had been degraded and dehumanized for so long that she kind of had reached a place of, it's so hard to explain the hospital to people, outside people, normal people, because it sounds so unbelievable. But when you're not treated with dignity, you're not allowed to sleep in a dark room or given a bath. when you're not entrusted with your own safety, when you're not allowed to eat the food you want or drink water when you want, when people are looking in your mouth, like open your mouth, let me make sure you swallowed your pills. When people are suspect of everything you do and they're constantly have you under a microscope, and you're not given any dignity, you begin to drift into this place where you don't really have anything left to lose. And Sonia lived there for a long time. And because of that, there were days where she just could not. And there were some staff members who would provoke her. And I talk about them in the book, who were really mean and unkind to her. The cruelty that I witnessed, like that Sonia had to tolerate, it drove her kind of, just, to use the colloquial term, it drove her crazy. And there would be days where she just couldn't take it anymore. And she would just try to rip her hair out or gouge her own eyes out. There were days where she would bite. There were a couple times where she managed to get out of a restraint, and she would bite like huge chunks of flesh out of her arms to try to bleed to death. She'd try to get to an artery. She would bite the inside of her mouth and spit blood everywhere. Like, it wasn't uncommon for us to wind up having Sonia's blood on us, because she would just spit on us in the middle of a unit meeting. You can't stop somebody from biting their tongue. So it was this thing that she would do. She would be like, you can't fucking stop me. So she would just chew the inside of her mouth and spit blood everywhere. And so we witnessed a lot of violence, and she would scream and cry for help, or sometimes just cry. And we couldn't do anything, because if we did, they would restrain us. And so, people ask me a lot about chair and the stuff that I was subjected to. But really, the worst thing I was subjected to in the hospital was witnessing abuse. Like, and there's no close second. I would rather sit chair for a week than listen to Sonia scream and cry for an hour. I still have nightmares about her crying and screaming. She talked about how her dad only abused her brother, and she had memories of her dad dragging her brother down the hallway by his hair, and he would scream and cry. And her dad never abused her, just him. And she talked about how horrible it was to witness that, because she couldn't do anything. She couldn't help. And I think that's something that we as people, because of social media and how connected we are and stuff, we witness a lot of abuse. Like, a lot of, especially in this country politically with where we are right now, we witness a lot of stuff that really amounts to abuse every day. And psychically, we're dealing with that stuff all the time, and it weighs on you. And it weighed on me in the hospital. And ultimately, my solution was to dissociate. So I began to kind of go into this place inside me that it's still like my resting heartbeat. It's where I naturally go, still to this day. Because when I left the hospital, I lived in that place inside of me for a long time. So there's it's how people, when they stand still and they're just standing there, they have their resting posture. Everybody has a resting posture. Emotionally, my resting posture is dissociation. Like, I just sort of, it's like Data from Star Trek. I turn the power switch off, and I just kind of go, and I turn off. And that's me. Like, that's my resting heartbeat. And I learned that in the hospital. And it was a really valuable survival tool that now haunts me. Like, I don't need that tool anymore. I'm not in there. But the muscle memory of that is still something that it's a big challenge for me to not allow that sort of resting posture to be what I return to every day still. And so it's really hard for me um, to not allow myself to just sort of tune out. And some people in the hospital didn't do that. They would try to help. They would try to intervene, and they would get restrained. And when you were put in restraints, you were pretty much guaranteed to be there for a month or two. It wasn't like you're going to be in restraints for an hour. Like, that didn't happen in our hospital. I think there were a couple people who were in restraints for a couple days, and then they got out. But usually it was like, you're going to be there for a week or two at least, if not like a month or two. I was terrified of restraints. My superpower was dissociating. And that's sort of how I survived chair. If you have to stare at a wall for 10 to 12 hours a day, you'll go mad if you're conscious the whole time. So you learn to sort of go into your mind. And yeah, I mean, I would sort of daydream and do stuff like that, but you can only do that for so long. Like, daydreaming even takes effort, and it can be sort of a maddening distraction because you think about things that you don't have access to or whatever. And I learned to just sort of turn off, and I turned the hospital around me into what felt like a bad movie. Like, I began to sort of use, I talked earlier about how early in my life, after my parents abandoned me at the airport, that I had learned to sort of sever ties emotionally with people. Well, that was, again, a really useful survival tool in the hospital. So I learned to just sort of turn everybody around me into like characters in a film. And so every day I would wake up and like, hey, I'm in the movie. Like, here, it's like the Truman Show. And so every day was like, here I am in this horrible movie where none of this is really happening. And so that was my only survival tool for 353 days. And it wasn't until I left, or I knew that I was leaving, that I began to be able to slowly, there came a time when I was, once my basically my insurance ran out, my insurance pulled me. They told my parents, like, look, we're not going to pay for this anymore. He doesn't need to be there. So they went about the very quick multi-month process of transitioning me back to the real world, what they call the outside world. So I started going on passes where I could leave the hospital grounds for an hour and go get ice cream with my mom. And the outside world to me was, it's weird. I mean, I could spend a long time talking about how I changed in the hospital and what the outside world was like when I started going on passes and when I left. But it was a double-edged sword because the world was really overwhelming now. It was really loud. People would talk whenever they wanted. They'd yell at each other. There was lots of noise. Like, the hospital was dead silent all the time, unless somebody was freaking out and screaming and crying for help. The outside world, people did what they wanted. There was music everywhere, and you go in a restaurant, and it's like there's 10 million things happening. There's the sound of silverware and people talking and music overhead and cars outside and the car alarm, and there's just tons of shit to track. And by then I'd become so hyper vigilant that I couldn't just sit there and tune it out. Like, I noticed all of it. And so, you ever seen a cat that's been an indoor cat its whole life, and then it gets outside for a second, and it's like, oh shit, like, I don't want to be out here. Like, this is not what I wanted. And they run back inside. That's how I felt. And it took me several months to be able to kind of live out there again. But the one thing that I took away from it that really surprised me was how beautiful the world was. Like, I never knew. Like, I had never noticed how incredibly beautiful the world is. And I don't just mean like nature, and that's a huge part of it, but it's like the color of somebody's hair, or their voice, or their laugh, or music, or food. There was just so much that I'd taken for granted, that when I left, I was like, wow, this is a really beautiful place. And I got to see it through new eyes. And that's something I treasure because I never lost that. Like, it's something I try to keep alive, and it stays alive on its own, but I can really hold it close and kind of cherish it when I want to. And I think that's part of what ultimately led me to become a backpacking guide, was trying to get people to see the world truly for what it is, instead of seeing it through their sort of normal everyday eyes. Shades of a single color. Like, there were so many different ways to manage surviving that place. Like, Michael, my roommate, his was humor. He would every day we would wake up and he would sing like Run DMC or Beastie Boys songs, and he would like he would be in his wheelchair restraints, like dancing and stuff, and I'm like, dude, you're a goofball. And to him, it was like humor was his release. And there was another guy in the hospital, I write briefly about him in the book. His name's Kevin. It was humor. He wanted to make other people laugh. Michael made himself laugh. Kevin made other people laugh. He wanted to sort of be the class clown that he could see himself making everybody happy. Yeah, some people got violent. Some people fought back. Some people a lot of people just sort of dissociated, or would just sort of become a wallflower, like just try to shrink into the wall and try to attract as little attention as possible. There are people from the hospital that said fewer than 100 words the whole time I was there, and they were there for like a year and a half. Like, they would never talk. They never brought attention upon themselves. I quickly learned, like, that's not a way out. Like, they'll keep you there for a long time if you don't communicate. And so that was holding them back from freedom. So I watched everybody as best I could and tried to understand. Like, I turned the whole system into a game. I was like, I'm going to leave this place as fast as possible. What's the best way to do it? And so I immediately tried to understand what not to do. And so what not to do was get violent, yell at people, be completely quiet, and try to skirt under the radar. So I tried to be sort of the good student who would like talk about things, and I would just make stuff up sometimes, just that I thought my doctor might like. But I think one of the things that I really took away from the hospital about humanity was that I think, and I think there are rare exceptions to this. That's debatable, but I think we all have really good and really bad people inside of us. I think, we like to identify individuals as sort of representing one single extreme of like being really evil or really good, and they don't have anything else inside of them. To cite a really horrible example, Dr. Mengele from the Nazi war camps, who did horrible, horrible testing on children. There were stories that there were times he would show up and bring candy to the children and stuff. And it's like, what kind of monster does that? Like, what? So I would see these horrible people at times be capable of like what seemed like really kind things. And so I walked away from that, if anything, being very skeptical of people. It didn't necessarily renew my faith in people. I think what it did is it cast doubt upon myself. Like, if those people can do that, like, maybe I have all these parts inside of me as well. When I left the hospital, I was very, very angry. I didn't know that at first. I wasn't in touch with it. It wasn't until I began drumming. I taught myself to play drums. It wasn't until I began drumming that I found that place inside of me. It was like mining for oil, and I found something else. It was like I had punctured it was like I was drilling down inside of me, and suddenly I punctured this reservoir of stuff that I didn't even know was there. And it was all this hurt. And, it was the infection I talked about much earlier in our interview about, I think that infection was beginning around that time. Well, the hospital made that infection a whole lot worse. And I think drumming, for some reason, in punk rock was able to get to that place inside of me in a way that nothing else really could. And that's when I sort of began to A, be aware of it, and B, try to find a way to channel it, because I felt sort of like a monster. I felt, I spent most of high school after I left the hospital fantasizing about publicly myself. And publicly, like, it's not like I wanted to go home and do it in the privacy of my room. I wanted to do it in public because I wanted to hurt people. Like, I wanted people to suffer the same way I had suffered. I wanted people to know how much I had hurt. That was like a key component of it. And so I knew I was in trouble. Like, I knew then it was like being in an airplane and the engine cut out. And I knew, like, my time is limited. I didn't know what to do about it. Like, I didn't have a parachute. I didn't have the skills to fly the plane. So I was just kind of waiting. And I just prayed or hoped that life would bring me something that might save me. And it did. It did. Yeah, when I left the hospital, I was 16. The first person who really tried to reach out to me was a guy named Gary Pritchard. He was a dad. I think he had 2 or 3 sons, like 1 daughter, 2 daughters maybe. My mom and I lived in a private condominium community, and in neighboring the condominium community was a very nice sort of housing community. Gary Pritchard, one of his kids skated. And so his kid wanted to learn to skate ramp. And so Gary Pritchard built him this absolutely gorgeous ramp. Well, back in the 90s or early 90s, late 80s, if you build a ramp in your yard, it's going to be like throwing grain in your backyard. And the next day you wake up and there's 1,000 ducks or pigeons in your backyard. Like, skaters from everywhere had heard about this ramp. And so we all began showing up. Well, it's like 100 yards from our condo. And so I was there every day. I'd skate with their kids. And Gary somehow, I would love to talk to Gary. I don't know if he's still alive, but, he's probably 30 years older than me. But I think he knew that I was like a troubled teenager, that I needed a mentor, that I needed somebody in my life. He knew my dad wasn't around. He knew I lived with my mom. And I'm sure he could sense on some level that I needed help. And so he'd frequently be like, hey man, like, let me show you how to build this thing or work on this. And everybody would leave, but we would hang out in the garage and he'd show me how to use a jigsaw or something. And I remember him doing that. And while I allowed him to, emotionally, I walled him off. I would not let him be the mentor he wanted to be. And I won't say I did it consciously. I don't think I was 16 or 17 or 18 and thinking I'm going to not let him. But I just remember thinking, like, it felt wrong. And now if I go back and I try to really revisit that, I think what was happening is I didn't feel worthy of it. Like, he was so kind. And I was like, that kind of kindness, I'm not worth that. Like, he's just too nice for me. So I didn't let Gary in. I never did. And then the second person in my life was Don Blair, who was, so I started a band with 2 guys named Donnie and Zach, and their dad's name was Don Blair. And when I met Donnie and Zach, when I started the band with them, their parents would invite me out to Sherman, where they lived in Texas, which is the middle of nowhere. And they'd invite me over for dinner and I could stay the weekend. It was like 2-hour drive from where I lived. And so it wasn't really convenient. So they'd let me stay with them for the weekend. And Don Blair was this kind of husky bearded dude with like John Lennon style glasses. And he was just so nice. Like his parent, both his parents, they would always cook me dinner and be like, "Hey, you're always welcome here." And they didn't put me down. Like they didn't put their kids down. They didn't think punk rock was stupid. They didn't think being in a band was stupid. They didn't think I looked like shit. They were just kind to me, and they were kind to their sons. Don was diagnosed with colon cancer while I was in the band, and very quickly he began losing weight. He got a colostomy bag, and he wasn't really responding to chemo. And we had had the band for about 2 years when Don, it was pretty clear he was not going to survive. So I drove out to Sherman one weekend, and I remember going to the hospital with Donnie and Zach and their mom. I remember walking in the hospital room, and I remember kind of standing at the back of the room because it was like, it's the four of them, the Blair family, and then there's Banning. I'm just going to stand in the back of the room and let them have their moment, you know? And so they're talking and being together. And so as we're about to leave, I turn and Don's like, "Hey, wait a second, Banning, like, don't leave yet." So I walked over to him, and he raised his hospital bed, like elevated the back a little bit. And he said, "Hey man, I know your dad's not really around, so you can just call me Dad." And I don't think Don knew like what that moment meant to me. Maybe he did, but emotionally in my life, I was really trying to close the door. I was like pushing the door closed, and people were trying to push it open, like trying to keep me from closing it. And Don Blair put his foot in the door, and he was like, "No, man, like you don't shut me out. Like, don't shut me out." And that single act, like he died, I think, less than a week later. But that act, it was like I was adrift at sea and I had found like a boat or a raft or something. And it was enough to keep me going for a while until I found Robert. So my attorney, Robert, so ultimately I wound up finding out that my friend Kevin and another person from the hospital were suing the hospital for insurance fraud. And there had been this attorney looking for me named Robert Andrews. And through a very strange coincidence, I wound up finding this out. And so I was asked to call Robert because he had been looking for me. So I called Robert, and he asked me to drive out to Fort Worth from Dallas to talk with him. And so I drove out the next day. It's about an hour drive. It's kind of after hours. I didn't get to Fort Worth till like 5 or something. So I signed into the building and went up to the 14th or 12th floor or something, and went into his office. And here's this short, sort of ruddy complexion, salt and pepper hair. Like he looks like a Franciscan monk, like a friar. He has like this really ridiculous bowl cut, and he's just really jolly and happy and smiley. And he asked me questions about the hospital, and he knew everything about it. He knew about indefinite chair and permanent chair. He knew about restraints. He knew about whenever they were going to restrain somebody, they used to always call Dr. Rush over the intercom. He knew about Dr. Rush. He knew all these things. And it was weird because I had never talked about the hospital in detail with anybody. Like I had told a couple of very close friends that I'd been in a place like that, but I never, ever, ever talked in detail about the things that happened there, like restraints or Dr. Rush. And so suddenly speaking that lingo to an adult, like to somebody, let alone an attorney, was like very strange. It felt sort of wrong. Like I wasn't supposed to say those words out here. Like it was like Pandora's box, like it was opening something that wasn't supposed to escape. And it turned out that, I learned a lot about the company that day. But the state of Texas had fined this company $5 million for what they called aggressive marketing practices, quote unquote. And it was like paying bribes and kickbacks to school counselors and other people to get kids signed into the hospital. Immediately, so much of my life came into focus. I was like, oh, now I get it. Because we kind of all suspected when we were there that this had something to do with insurance, because nobody left there better. Like the only reason people left was because everybody would say it. Everybody'd use the same words. My insurance is pulling me. That's everybody said. Everybody, 99% of people who left that place said my insurance is pulling me. And so we all knew it was insurance. So, but in our teenage minds, that didn't seem illegal. It was like, okay, my insurance isn't going to be paying for me being here anymore. And so we just wrote it off as like, this is how the adult world works. Well, it turns out that, I don't want to go into the details because there's like legal repercussions for that. But it turns out that the company ultimately pleaded guilty for paying kickbacks and bribes to school counselors and other employees to get kids signed into the hospital, and that they were misdiagnosed. It just all suddenly made sense. It was like, oh, okay. Like I was right. Like I didn't need to be there. Like, and so I joined a class action lawsuit along with about 60 something other kids from the hospital. It was settled out of court. I took my share of the money, which was a significant amount, but certainly not enough to like go and live on. And I put it in a lifetime annuity because I wanted to do as much as I could with it. My mom had thrown me out of the house when I was in high school multiple times. And so I'd been homeless for short periods, and I'd had a lot of jobs. And so for me, I didn't want to be rich. I wanted to be stable. Like I wanted to be, I can eat peanut butter and jelly and ramen. Like I just need to pay my rent. Like I don't need to live a fancy life. I just need a place to sleep. And so that's what I set my life up for. And that was it. I was done. I was like, okay, cool. Like, it's all settled. I'm hurt. I'm angry and wounded, but I've got this friend, Robert, now, his family. I became very close to his family. So I moved to Fort Worth to be close to them. I rented an apartment out there, and life seemed to be sort of, it was like an upgrade from what I felt when I was 15. It's like, okay, this is not the life I asked for, but this is good. Like it's not, when I was 15, it's like, this isn't the life I asked for, but it's a life. Now it was like, this isn't the life I asked for, but this is a good life. I was fine. Like I was set. And then again, like my life always does, it took multiple crazy turns again. And a lot of my old survival instincts came back. Addiction comes in all shapes and forms, and some, because they're socially unacceptable or less acceptable, have these external forces that force people to take a look at them. It's like, okay, you're drinking and driving. That's illegal. You can't do that. But like dissociating when I'm at the line at the grocery store is not illegal. In fact, nobody's even going to really notice. And so my addiction is not a substance addiction. It's like a dissociation addiction. And it's very easy for me to keep doing that because nobody's going to call me out on it. It's not illegal. And so all these old survival tools that I had used that had been valuable at one point in time in my life now started becoming really destructive. They started really tearing my life apart. And that's something I still struggle with. And it wasn't until I moved to Fort Worth and things began to unravel that I was forced to begin to try to tackle that stuff. The word therapy still kind of is like a bad word to me. When I hear it and when I say it, I still get this kind of, it's a cringy. I didn't see my dad for 26 years. And it wasn't until I moved back here to California and became a backpacking guide that I reunited with him. And our first meal together after 26 years, we sat down and talked. And he said something that day, because we were talking about the hospital. He said something that day that really helps me wrap my mind around the issue of therapy and psychiatry and stuff. He said, look, when I was 15 and I was in the hospital, he went and had a meeting with my doctor. And he said, look, I'm a pilot. And every time people get on my plane, they trust me to know what I'm doing. They trust that I have their safety in mind, and that I'm going to take the plane's going to take off and it's going to land where it's supposed to, and that they're safe. He said, as a psychiatrist, I have to do the same thing. I have to trust you, but you don't have an MRI or an X-ray or something that you can point at and say, here's your son's depression. Here's your son's suicidal ideation. I have to just trust you, trust your word. And he said, I'm going to trust you today like my passengers trust me. And that is one of the most crucial facts of therapy and psychiatry to understand, is that it implicitly involves faith, because you don't have that MRI or that X-ray that's able to identify like something that you can just surgically remove. It's depression. I returned to therapy out of desperation. I had moved back to California. I was guiding. I was dating a lot and sleeping around and trying to fill this hole inside of me that's just like this massive empty void from feeling like my parents didn't love me and that I'm not likable. And I was just filling this with like first dates and second dates and third dates, and then moving on to the next person. And it was just crushing me. And I don't know why. I don't know why at that time it finally had reached some climax. Like I felt like I was spinning out. And my attorney, Robert, who adopted me when I was 23, I went through an adult adoption. I call him Pop. So I talked to Robert one day, and he said, look, promise me someday, not today, not just whenever you're ready, to like give therapy another chance. And I wanted to yell at him, but he knew, he knew what the hospital had done to me. He found that place even more reprehensible than I did. That place was anathema to him. I knew how much he hated that place and what they had done to us. And when I say us, I mean all the kids from the hospital, not just me. He loved all of us. So I knew what he was asking when he was asking me to try therapy again. He wasn't just saying it. He knew, and he understood, and he knew that I knew that. And so I didn't get mad. I was like, okay, I'll give it a try someday. And so during this period of my having moved back to California, I was like, this is it. I need help. And I was kind of approaching becoming again. It literally amounted to me just Googling therapists nearby and calling them on the phone and hearing a voice and trying to find a voice that did something for me. I think it was the third or fourth person I called. She called me back and we talked, and I explained to her a little bit about the hospital, and she just listened very quietly. She didn't act shocked or like something was wrong with me. She just said, it took a lot of courage for you to call me. I appreciate that. She honored that. She saw me. And that really helped me. I asked her, I was like, if I come see you, is it, will you maybe leave the door open, or just because I don't want anybody coming to take me away. And she always respected everything I asked. She always respected. So yeah, there would be days she'd leave the door open. There was a time I've been seeing her for a year or two, and she was taking notes one day, and I looked at her and I was just watching her take notes. And she said, "Hey, why'd you look at me?" And I was like, I just I don't like it when you take notes. She's like, "Why?" And I said, "Well, they were always writing in our charts in the hospital, and I feel like you're writing something terrible down about me." And she said, "Yeah, I won't do that anymore." And she never once wrote in a notepad again. She's like, "I'll just take notes later. I won't do it in front of you." And she said, "You can read them anytime." I was like, her kindness and openness seemed surreal. I was like, this, okay. And so it was through this that I began to retrust therapy. And so when I do talk to people nowadays who are skeptical of therapy or ask me, like, how did you do it? I said, treat therapy, and I mean this very literally, treat therapy like you're dating somebody you're going to marry. You should feel a sense of safety and warmth, like a friend. Like it should not be some clinical relationship where it's like, okay, I'm going to go, but I'm not going to like it, or I don't feel safe around them, but I'm just going to keep talking. Like, don't do that. Like you need to find the person for you. Like this is a multi-year relationship where you're sharing really, really important things with them. So it should be something where you feel safe and you feel seen. Um, and if you don't, then run. Like go like so if you're a teenager and your parents are forcing you to like go to therapy, or it feels like forcing, like if you're going to somebody you don't like or trust, then tell them to get you somebody else. Like keep shopping around until you find the right person for you, because there are right people for you. Therapists come in all sorts of styles and colors and shapes and voices and affects and mannerisms, and you'll find the one who gets you, you know. And so it's really important to treat it with that level of seriousness. It's no joke. Like it's one of the most important relationships you'll have in your life. Like why would you treat it like you're going to buy a burger? It's not that simple. Guiding is one of the greatest things that ever happened to me. I was probably born to be a guide, and my life just like went on this massive detour, and I wound up finding it later in life. But I also don't think I would be a good guide if I had lived a different life. I think my life is part of what makes me a great guide. But I was living in Dallas. I had returned there after living in Austin and going through a bad breakup, and I was really in kind of a bad place in my life. But I had inertia, like I had forward momentum. It wasn't one of those times where I was in a bad place and I was losing momentum and there was a lot of inertia holding me down. This was a period where I had beaten the inertia, and I had like I was like moving forward. I had like some momentum, and I can't really explain why. I don't know exactly why I felt like I had that, but I did have some forward motion in my life. And so I was looking for a new direction, something I could do that would give me a purpose. Like I wanted a purpose, and that singular word really fits exactly what I wanted. Like I wanted the French term, like raison d'être. Like I wanted a reason to be. Like I wanted a purpose. I had grown up sailing with my dad. My dad was in the Navy, so he had always sailed, and he loved sailing small boats. And we lived in Southern California, and so we would go sailing out to Catalina when I was a little boy. I wouldn't call that deep sea sailing, but it's also not like casual sailing. You're out at sea for a couple hours and you're kind of away from land, you know, and you get a taste of it. And we did that a lot when I was a boy, and I loved the ocean. My first job was becoming a sailor, and I don't write about it in the book. I did initially, but I took that part of the book out. I wound up getting a job on a wooden sailboat in Martha's Vineyard, and through a freak accident, the boat was destroyed in a storm. It's a beautiful wooden schooner. It was destroyed in a storm, in a historic storm, in I think it was 2010. And so keeping that momentum up and fighting that inertia, I was like, okay, I've got to find something else. Like I can't feel sad. Like I can't just sit here and mope. Like I got to keep the momentum up. So I went back to Dallas. It's like, what can I do next? Well, the other thing I'd done with my dad was hike. Like I'd spent so much time outdoors with my dad. And part of this was really me trying to, because I didn't have a relationship with my dad at this time. So this was me trying to, and I think a lot of people probably do this, where they're estranged from a parent, and so the only way they can get to know them is through some weird form of like reverse engineering, where you're like getting to know the things that they loved. Like you're trying the things that they loved to see like if that's in you too, you know. At that time I was watching a lot of documentaries and reading books, so I like I always did. I was like midnight, got in bed, scrolled through my list of movies on Netflix I was going to watch that night. And I had passed this documentary by Ken Burns about America's national parks multiple times. I was like, I'm not going to watch it. It looks boring. It looks boring. It looks boring. Like for months, I'd just passed this documentary. I don't know why, but that night I played it, and a shot of Yosemite came up. And I cannot really explain to you why, but the minute I saw that image, it was like, I was having a waking dream, and I was seeing what needed to be my future. It was a very strange experience. It was like a very spiritual kind of experience. And the shot is of Yosemite Valley. I didn't know it at the time, but it's taken of a place called, from a place in the valley called Tunnel View, which is like Disneyland. There's always like a million people there, but this is done in the wintertime. And so there's snow drifting down, and the valley's kind of a U shape, and it's all the trees are dusted with snow. And I just remember thinking, looking at it and thinking, I'm going to make that place my home. I don't know why. It was like a very strange thing to think. So I woke up the next day and I Googled the words backpacking jobs Yosemite. And the first thing that came up was REI, which is a store. It's a co-op here in the United States. And so I was like, okay. I looked up that, and it showed pictures of Yosemite and backpacking. And almost every picture had a picture of this tall, blonde woman with this big smile. And I read some of the reviews, and they kept mentioning a woman named Karen. So I Googled backpacking jobs, REI Yosemite or something, and Karen. And I found her name. Her name was Karen Najarian. I found her on Facebook, and I sent her a message. And I said, hey, I'll work for you for free. I don't need your money, but I want to help guide people. And I haven't backpacked since I was a little kid, but I'll do anything, you know. And she sent me a message on Facebook back, like less than probably half an hour, 10 minutes, 20 minutes, 15 minutes later. And she said, hey, and I put a PS at the end of my message. I said, there's a big, long reason why I want to do this, but it's really complicated and it takes a long time to explain. And so she emailed me back, and she said, she's like, hi, Banning, any life worth living has a great story behind it. Feel free to share. So I emailed her. I like vomited like 10,000 words. I actually went over Facebook's message length. So I had to send her 2 messages, and I sent her like a synopsis of my life. And I didn't hear back from her for like a day or two. And she emailed me back, and she said, or messaged me back, and she said, hey, give me some, whoa, this is a lot. Give me some time to think about this. And so she eventually messaged me back, and she said, hey, look, if you're willing to fly out to California and interview with me, let's see what happens. And she lived in a town called Martinez. That was about an hour from where my dad lived, and I hadn't seen my dad in 26 years. So before I could stop myself, I called my dad. I still remembered his phone number. I hadn't heard his voice in years and years and years. The minute he picked up the phone, he and I sound just alike. It was like listening to myself answer the phone. He said, Banning, how are you? And I said, I'm great, Dad. Like, how are you? And he said, I'm good. I was just out in the barn. It's so good to hear from you. And I said, well, hey, I'm thinking about getting a job working as a backpacking guide in Yosemite. And he said, oh man, that sounds amazing. You should come out and stay with us. And I was like, at first I was mad. I was like, what the hell? Like, why wouldn't you call me and say this like 10 years ago? Like, why wouldn't you reach out and say, hey, come spend time with me? Why does it take this? Like, I wanted to yell at him, but I was like, you know what? Don't, just put it aside. So it's like, okay, that sounds great. And so I flew out and had that lunch with my dad where he talked about the MRI and the X-ray. And I met Karen the next day. She drove out to my dad's ranch. Karen, my backpacking boss, she died about 3 weeks ago. And man, what a woman. Like, what a human being. Like, just one of the most incredible women to walk this planet. She's 6 feet tall and gets out of her car and walks toward me with just this big grin, shakes my hand. She had big hands. She'd kill me for saying that, but she had these big hands. She shook my hand. And she knew a lot about my life by this time because we had messaged each other. We went down to what place called the Cheese Factory in the Sonoma town square and ate. And she interviewed me. We talked. And I discovered pretty quickly, and it was through her, through that interview, really, that I got a taste of what guiding would be like. Because Karen was wounded. Karen had had kind of a nasty upbringing, and she talked about it that day. And while she didn't articulate it in the way that I do, what I learned that day is that nature can heal us in a very unique way. And I often tell my clients this, like right now, as I speak to you, I'm looking out a window at some redwood trees and an oleander and a Chinese elm and a few other trees. It's really green and lush. It's a beautiful day. And when I talk to my clients, like we're out in the backcountry, Yosemite, and they're like, oh man, because I just sleep out, like no tent. Like I just sleep on the granite with my sleeping bag. And they're like, how do you do that? And I'm like, man, this is our home. Like this box I'm sitting in right now, this framed house, this is a house, but we're human beings that evolved to live out there. Like that's our home. Something inside of us knows this. I don't care how sheltered you are. I don't care how long you've been boxed up. I don't care if you've never backpacked. If I take you in the backcountry for long enough, there's going to come a moment where you suddenly are like, this is it. I'm home. Like I get it now. And for some people, it happens very quickly. And for some people, it takes a while. But there's something about being in that environment that changes us. And it does it in a way that when you're backpacking with a group of people and you're all depending on each other, like you're carrying communal gear, like somebody's got your food, somebody's got the pan, somebody's got the, and so when you do that together in a place that's so beautiful like Yosemite, and you're exhausted and you've worked hard and you've earned your view, you sit down, you put your feet in a creek and you put cold river water on your face, you clean off and you sit down and you have dinner with these people that you've walked with all day. You realize that the boundaries that separate us in our everyday urban lives completely dissolve in the backcountry. It doesn't matter how different we are. When we all backpack together, a lot of that stuff comes down. And what I wound up discovering is that I went into being a guide thinking that the mountains and the experience would somehow heal that wound inside of me that I had been filling with so many things. What wound up healing me were the people, which was a massive surprise. I never really liked people. I didn't want to be around people. I wanted the prestige of being a guide that guided people, but I didn't want to be social. Like I didn't want to hang out with these people. But it turns out that being with those people and them sharing their lives and their experiences with me and them listening to me as I share my life and experiences is what healed me. Like I walked into guiding thinking I'm messed up, I'm broken, and guiding will heal me. And all my clients are like really put together whole people that are not wounded. And that's absolutely false. Like, we are all wounded. All of us are fucked up. All of us are running from something. All of us need healing. All of us. I don't care who you are. When you backpack together and you spend that time out there together and you earn that experience together, Karen, my boss, she used to always say, the mountains will open your pores. And what she meant was that it opens us, it makes us more porous, open to listen to each other, open to be with each other, open to sharing ourselves emotionally with each other, to be vulnerable, to be overcome by beauty, to be scared, to be in pain, to be miserable. Like, all those things, when you share those things communally, they connect us. And backpacking is such a great vehicle for that, because it can be miserable, it can be painful, it can be hard, it can be challenging, it can be beautiful, and so it's this voluntary hardship that you go out and experience together and share together. And there's such a bonding in that. I didn't know that becoming a guide. And by the end of my first season, I was addicted. I was like, this is, because people are frequently called to nature for reasons that they don't really understand. But then they get there and they're like, oh, like, this is why I felt like I wanted to be here. This is a story I frequently share. My first season guiding, I think it was my third or fourth trip, I was going to guide a Half Dome trip. Half Dome trips, pretty much every trip, we sleep in the valley for one night, just sleep in our tents. We haven't backpacked anywhere. We wake up early the next morning and then take a vehicle of some sort to our trailhead. Or in some cases, we walk to our trailhead if it leaves from the valley. This Half Dome trip, we had to take a vehicle up to the Tioga Road and to a trailhead called the Sunrise Trailhead. The second most dangerous or difficult thing that we have to do on the trip happens in the first 100 meters, which is we have to cross a very deep creek. Very cold, very deep creek in spring, because it's spring and it's all the runoff is melting. And so it's, snow melt. It was snow like 12 hours ago, and now it's like chest or waist deep, freezing cold, very quickly moving water. So I get there, Karen's there, and a third guide is there. We always guided Half Dome trips with 3 guides. And Karen's like, hey, can you help people ferry their packs across? So some people are, you always unbuckle your pack when you cross a creek. It's a safety thing. So we're always like, unbuckle your pack, carry it across, try to hold it up if you can. If you can't, it gets wet, no big deal. People who don't want to do it, I can ferry your pack across for you. So I'm doing all this, managing clients. About 10 minutes pass, and I'm helping people on the other side, like, dry their feet, because you take your boots off and socks off and hope you don't fall and get them wet, because you want to keep your boots and socks dry. So everybody's drying their feet on our other side of the creek. And I turn around and I see Karen on the far side of the creek where we're leaving from, where we were coming from, with a guy, a big dude who I remembered the night before saying he had been in the military, and his wife. And the dude is sitting on a log, and his wife has her arm around him. And Karen's kind of hunched over them a little bit, talking to them, and she has her hand on his shoulder. And he's clearly crying, like his body's moving. It's like, what is going on? So I'm walking toward them, and Karen sees me, and she just like puts a finger up, like, we're good, just hold on a minute. I was like, okay. So I'm just standing in the middle of this freezing cold creek. After a moment, all 3, well, Karen's already standing up, but they all stand up together. They walk toward the creek together, and he and his wife hold hands and walk into the creek together. And I lived in Texas, man. I've seen people like get baptized as adults, like in water. And that's what it looks like to me. It looks like a baptism. This husband and wife are walking into the water together. Karen's got their packs on the log, and she's like, hey, can you come help me with their packs? So I'm coming across the creek, and Karen gets in the water with one of the packs behind them. And I was like, hey, what's going on? Like, is everything okay? Because I've seen people cry because they have high altitude sickness. Like, I don't know what's going on. Karen looks at me and suddenly she remembers that this is my first season guiding. She's like, oh, like this is my third trip. She looks at me and she goes, oh, that's right. Like you're the new guy. She doesn't say that, but it's like, oh, that's right. Like she's remembering, like, I don't know how this works. And I was like, what? And she said, his brother drowned crossing a creek when they were younger, and he came here to finish crossing one for him. I knew that moment. I was like, I'm sold. Like this is my purpose. I have found my purpose in life. Karen just looked at me like, this is what we do. Like, this is guiding. And pretty much without exception, almost every trip had an event like that. Like somebody would come on the trip to scatter the ashes of their husband or wife or their mom or dad. Or I had clients celebrate 20 years sober and never thought they'd be able to backpack. I've had ex-heroin addicts that had OD'd and survived and wanted to come to Yosemite. I've had so many different types of events that people were either coming. I had a couple come and because they were going to get divorced. And they're like, we always wanted to backpack together. I've had so many events like that take place that taught me, like, and I always tell people, and Karen always said this too, like, we don't guide people, the clients guide us. Like, we as guides are getting, like, we're the ones who get so much out of the trip. I felt like every trip I should be paying the clients for the experience because I got so much out of what they did for me. I wish our urban everyday lives had the opportunity for that. And they don't, because of the way we've designed our lives. I hope more people pursue, especially people who read my book, pursue finding that opportunity for themselves. And it may not be backpacking. It could be kayaking. It could be cycling. It could be rock climbing. It could be whatever, Once you find your thing and you can do it with people and it creates that connection, then yeah, it's just the greatest.